Hello, everyone. We are live. Welcome to the workshop series of Archway Hunt-A-Thon. Super excited to kick it off today with Leif and Connor from the Andromeda team. This is going to be about Andromeda ADOs and basics, but before we hop onto that, would love to sort of recap the hackathon with you. We kicked it off a while ago. The prize pool is 100,000 US dollars. So pretty sure all of you wants to get a pie, all of you want to get a pie of the prize pool. A very attractive opportunities for the developers. If you've sort of always been in the zone of having something in your mind, I think this would be the time to kick off your building process in the Hunt-A-Thon and with all the amazing partners of the hackathon. There are four tracks in the hackathon. The track one is DeFi Warriors, track two is about Mystic Degens, track three is NFT Explorers, and then Mobile Crafters. And the prize pool being evenly distributed in all the four tracks. I'd love to now invite Leif and Connor, but before we hop on to the actual dev building stuff, would love to, hear some words from you, Leif, and Connor. Just talking about what you would expect out of this hackathon, and what do you have for devs today?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start off. My name's Leif Sørensen. I'm our lead off-chain engineer. I'll be hosting the majority of the presentation today. I'm going to specifically kind of walk through some of the processes, introduction to our system, as well as kind of where we can find resources and things of that nature. Then I'll go in from that to kind of outline a bit more what the tracks actually are, what's expected for the build, some recommendations, try to get a few things in there as well. And I'm going to try and leave a little bit of time for some Q&A at the end. I will kind of preface this as well as saying that the majority of everything that we're looking at today, I mean, I could pick one item and I could speak about it for an hour. But we have resources available for pretty much everything that we'll be discussing, and I'll be showing where those are. We already have links available for many of them as well. So if there's anything that I go over, it doesn't have to be remembered exactly. In addition, if there's some general understanding of what things are going on, that'll be sufficient, because I think the resources will be available to be looked at, and that'll probably be part of the track guide, is kind of getting more familiar with the systems and the concepts.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot. But yeah, everyone watching us today, feel free to drop in your questions in the chat, and we'll take it all up towards the end.
Do you want me to go next?
Connor would, yeah, you want to introduce
yourself? Sure. I'm Connor. I'm our lead developer. My main focus on Andromeda is mostly working on the operating system and the smart contracts, but I would say I'm involved in pretty much every single aspect of the entire system. My hope for this hackathon is that you guys get a good understanding of what we've built and what it can do and how it's integrated with Archway.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. With that, I think we can dive into the actual content of the workshop. And for everyone, just no need to get overwhelmed with all the information shared during the course of the hackathon. You can always revisit the workshops, always revisit the docs on the hackathon page itself. Yeah, over to you, Leif, now.
Well, thank you very much. And in addition to some of the Q&A today, we'll also be having some continued kind of troubleshoot and open discussions as well, with some of the open office hours going on. So there's additional areas as you dive into these things in order for you to get some additional support or questions. We also will be actively participating in the builders chat on Archway, and you can find us on our Discord and other communication channels as well. So if you wind up with questions that aren't addressed here today, just feel free to reach out, and we're happy to try and get you support and answers as need be as well. So let me go ahead and switch myself over so that I can get into some of the discussion points. As I mentioned, I'm going to go a little bit quicker today, and there will be some higher level elements of what we will be discussing that I probably won't dive into as heavily. I'm going to be a little bit more dev centric, so there may be some terminology and things like that. So there's There's a few elements that I will probably take a bit more of a Web3 developer approach in my language today. So if there is some clarification issues because some of the technologies or terminologies are a little bit more tech heavy or Web3 heavy, then please feel free to go ahead and make some notes about that in the chat. We can try to address those later on as well. I'll start out by giving some kind of references for some of the available documentation and resources that we have that will kind of cover a lot of what I'm going to try and go through today. There's a bit of time constraint, so as I go through some of this, it'll be a little bit quick and trying to be more of give you a concept of where you are, what things are, what to look at, things of that nature. But we have a learn section over at AndromedaProtocol.io, has the basic introduction to the systems and the setup. You can find more information, as well as the links to some of the tutorials and guides that we'll be going through. We have video explainers kind of introducing the concepts, some of the key core features. The YouTube channel also includes quite a few tutorials, walkthroughs, and other things of that nature as well. And we've got some general introductions to what some of the concepts are. So it's a good place to get started with kind of a general introduction to us and what it is that we're doing and trying to provide to you, as well as kind of links and resources for any of the things that you might need. We also have some general support set, and there's other ways to communicate with us as well. So if you have any specific questions, it's also a good resource for that. But in addition to that, we do have the docs, and they're a little bit more technically oriented, and they're at docs.andromedaprotocol.io. And they will generally have a base introduction to the key core concepts and far more technical implementations. We'll also see how we can reference those in the system themselves. But it's a really great resource, and we're very proud of the documentation. We know that that's something that's really important to developers, and we try to spend a lot of effort in kind of keeping those really well maintained and easily communicated. They generally break down through the platforms and framework, giving the basic introductions of what it is that our systems, are operating from, how they work, how they're constructed, the general purposes. And then we go in through to breakdowns on some of the more specific technical elements, some of the ADOs or Andromeda digital objects, which I'll explain here a little bit more later on, and kind of the introduction to those and our base initial offerings of the 15 ADOs that we have. We also give some general breakdowns on our CLI, which we won't be looking at today, but is available as well. And introduction processes for some building and developing apps using the CLI. Additionally, there will be some resources here on how you can be developing and contributing ADOs to our logic library, which will be one of the tracks that we'll be discussing and looking at. So that's available at docs.andromedaprotocol.io. If you're really looking for a much more in-depth view of what it is that we're doing and what we're trying to achieve in a bigger vision, I'd recommend that you go look at the white paper 2.0 that we've released. It's a little bit longer at about 50-something pages, but really an in-depth overview of the systems and vision of what it is that we have going on. Today, I'm going to give you a basic introduction to the web application. We've just recently released our developers preview. So this is kind of the suite designed for the developers to be able to start getting in and developing and building using our solutions. And we'll be moving forward with some integration options for consolidating these and presenting them to the consumer in the next few months as well. But we'll focus specifically today on the web application, give you a little bit of an introduction to it and how that works, what to expect, and some of the key core functional elements of it. So as I jump into this, I want to note, and this is a valuable thing for I think any new person coming in, we're really big on trying to make sure you have access to information and supportive information. So at the very top section, we have the Learn section. This will launch the guides that you can see here. Here in our general guides, these are different than the standard docs that we were looking at before. These specifically focus for the web application. We do an introduction, kind of the overview of what to expect from the web application. We'll try and walk you through the various sections, which we'll look at today, and get you a better understanding of what the core functional purposes of those sections are. Additionally, if you're a little bit newer to the space, then we go ahead and make sure to outline some of learning the basics, setting up your wallet, the token standards for NFTs, and the fungible tokens from the 721s and the CW20s, which I'll reference later. If you're not familiar with the non-fungible token standard, there is actually a workshop being hosted, I believe, by Adrian in the next couple of days. You can look at the lineup here for the hackathon, and I would recommend attending that to get more information and support specifically about how NFTs are structured and managed. We do try to provide a little bit more information on what to expect with that, as well as some general recommendations for getting those up on IPFS and a couple other places. And we'll kind of introduce the general systems. And from that point, we have a whole series of guides. So anything that we're going to look at today is going to be based out of these general guide sets. Now, we've designed these to be kind of a progressive, more growing in difficulty as we go through them. So we kind of get into how do you build your first app on the web interface, which we'll do a build here shortly. And then we walk through how do we add more complexity to that? How do we create an NFT auction, an NFT collection first? How do we bring that to an auction? How can we sell that through a marketplace? We work through some of the examples of different functional elements that we have. We have 4 primary use cases that we have set up in the general example sets that we're using here. And I'll show them to you in just a moment. And they specifically are laid out here, being the auction, the marketplace, our crowdfund, and our CW20 exchange. We'll also be adding in some new additional features and functions. We have some additional use cases that will be coming forward, but these really should get you a good set of information, structure, familiarity, and by the time that I feel like you've completed that process, you feel a lot more of the freedom to actually make your own custom configurations and understand a bit better how it is that you can be utilizing this system or contributing to this system as well. So in the end goal of what I'll illustrate today, we'll actually be trying to deploy some on-chain solutions using our systems in order to connect them to some web applications that a front-end consumer could come, connect a wallet, and interact with them in a certain build. So I have 4 of those general use case examples that I mentioned before. We can take a quick look at them as kind of the final idea of what it is we're actually trying to create and build, and then we'll get into where that goes. So just as a quick note from where that is, what we're trying to do, here is an auction example. It's our use case 1. In the use case 1, we create an NFT collection. We mint 1 NFT, and then we send it over to an auction ADO, which it facilitates for a sale in an English auction method, allowing you to come in and place a bid and kind of have a bid war within the duration that you've configured and set up. Additional functionality includes our marketplace. In this particular example, I've set up multiple NFT collections with multiple NFTs, and we'll walk through what that process looks like a little bit more as well. I think I'll probably do an example here in the build with you, specifically for a crowdfund. These crowdfunds are designed as a fixed finance crowdfund. This essentially means that we have a certain amount of NFTs that we wind up minting. We'll look at batch minting so that they can be done all in one big batch instead of having to mint individual NFTs. Those are then provided to the crowdfund, set up for a sale amount. And the goal level for the crowdfund works essentially that if you are to meet your goal by getting enough backers or supporters to come in and make pledges for those NFTs at the whatever that price limit is, then if you are successful at the conclusion of the sale or once you've met those goals, then the funds will be sent either to the crowdfund owner or whoever was designated for the crowdfund, and NFTs will be distributed to all the backers and participants. If the goal is not met, then the funds are all returned to the backers or the participants, and all the NFTs are burned. Now, all that functionality is actually occurring on-chain, and so these front-end web applications are simply coming in and making the connection process for the wallet so that you can connect your Kepler wallet for this integration, and handling the data retrieval of the information about the NFTs and the configurations and the data for that, and facilitating for the functional purchases and things like that by making those interactions. Our final example comes in with a token from a CW20 token and creating a small exchange in order to make listings of that. And that's what those general guides will walk you through, is how do you actually come in, create these process builds to build the backend infrastructure, and then connect those to some front-end interfaces here. We've laid out these 4 examples for you, but when we get here to just a little bit, we'll see that you have full customization options for this. These are public repos, and you'll have access to the source, and we can do some contributions there. Let me go ahead and jump into the app and just take a quick run through it so that we can get a little bit of an idea. It's going to be very kind of touch the basics with it, but there's a lot more information. As I said, those guides will walk you through that full process, and they get more complicated as you go, so you get a lot more familiar with the system. But I think a quick, simple build for today will let us get some introduction to some of the key core elements of what it is that we're hoping to accomplish and do, and kind of prep us up for the discussions on the tracks as well. So here within, I'm on the ADO builder, and we have a couple of general template builds, and I'm going to come back to those, but I'm going to start out with an empty project so that I can kind of give you an introduction to our logic library. Essentially, we have it set up initially here for building each one of these elements within an app, essentially allowing for us to have access to this logic library. This logic library consists of, right now, about 15 audited examples of different kind of functional elements, each with different either interactions or data storage, and they've been designed to be in a composable system. And we've created this process that allows you to come in and now configure, deploy, interact, and integrate smart contract solutions without needing to be a smart contract developer. This logic library has each of these elements, and they are designed to be able to work together. They have the base functionalities that you're going to be anticipating for most standard Web3 solutions. And this logic library is actually designed to be community contributive. So although we've outlined it with the initial builds of some examples for ourselves of our ADOs, this is actually designed to be something that you can be contributing to if you're as a smart contract developer. We also have an economics engine that allows for the contributors to the ALL to actually be able to get paid based off of the adoption and usage that people do. And each one of these systems or each one of these elements can now be added into that general app. You can consider it as kind of a container that lets you compose all of these within one general container and extend some of the functionality, self-referencing, and a couple of things that we can get into. So I'd mentioned I want to do a build for the crowdfund, and I'm going to take a quick look at that. That would start out with a crowdfund ADO, allowing me the functionality to build the crowdfund. So I simply had to load that up, add it in, and it's given me a simple interface for entering information. Now you can see this custom label here. We can actually use these references, so I can come in and use this reference from the crowdfund itself and give it a custom name. This name can be referenced by other elements that I add in here. So when I add in another ADO, if I need to be referencing to that, I can now reference to it by that name instead of having to do a deployment, wait to figure out what the contract address is, and then make the reference from the other element. We have a virtualized file system, which allows for us to have more plain language, plain naming conventions for referencing a lot of these elements. And it works a lot like the structure that you would expect from Linux. And we can get you more support information on how that works. This build example, I'll actually use that. But quickly, I want to go through what it is that we're looking at. So with the crowdfund, we only have a few small configuration options that we really have to reference. And we've tried to set things up so that there's a general form that's easy to understand, well labeled, and allows you to kind of get a good feel for that. We have some general functional elements that apply to these, and this will be true for any of those. So I can duplicate this, I can remove it if I want to. I can temporarily disable it as well if it's something that I wanted to have in my build and I wasn't sure. And additionally, you'll find a menu set here. So you can actually download and import any of the configuration changes that you have for any of these. So if you're constantly re-releasing the same information, you can download those configurations, re-import them. If you need to send them to someone else, we've designed this so that you can kind of come back to it so that you can share it with others. Maybe you're the one who needs to construct it, but you're not the one who owns the wallet. We're really trying to think through that process of what does that look like for a collaborative team to work through these elements. Additionally, documentation is always available anytime you're at any of these panels at any process. You should be able to hit that documentation and it'll load up the specifics. We're in the instantiation section for the crowdfund, and we see that information right here. So that's always accessible no matter where we are. So a crowdfund build, I have a crowdfund. Also need an NFT collection, which is based off of the CW721 standard. So the same thing, I can make that selection out of that collection from the ALL. I select the 721, and now I add that as an app component, and I have these references available. So now that same functionality, if I needed the documentation for the 721, some support information, and these are the general configuration information that we need in order to set up an NFT collection. These are not the NFTs, this is where the collection is. So we need to give authorization to who's allowed to mint for making new NFTs. We'll want to give them a base name, and we'll want to give them a symbol name as well. And that would be sufficient in order for us to build a base crowdfund. And just as a quick note, I'm going to go ahead and show us real quickly how that can also be accessed in a different way. So we've been custom adding these ALL app components into this build, but we have these general constructed sets already kind of created, and they handle the use cases as well as a couple others. So we see here we've got the marketplace, the auction, our exchange, our crowdfund, which we're working on right now, and our CW20 staking. We've got a couple other ones there. But if I come into the crowdfund, this is already pre-configured with that information of the setup and configuration of what it is that you would be looking for to perform and do in that. And these are kind of a set that we can create these templates for reusable systems, pre-configure, load data, and that can be made quickly available. So this particular crowdfund example has the same setup we just did, and it's already been pre-named for us with tokens. Now we notice here in the minter address, we were talking about this is the permissioning rights for us to be able to mint NFTs for this CW721. And you can see here that we've actually referenced this with a simple name and not, say, my wallet address. This allows me to give permission to another ADO. And in this case, I have it linked. This is a common in file structure, if you're familiar with the dot operator, meaning here in my current path, here within the app that I'm building, one of my siblings, one of the children of the container that I'm within, is named crowdfund, and I want to give it permission. This is automatically linked up, so I can scroll in here to see that. And here I'm actually referencing and saying, hey, for the crowdfund, the token address for the NFT token collections I'm going to use is called tokens. So we kind of have this self-referential level. I'm going to quickly just pull that up in my app builder so you can see what that looks like in more of a routed system. I'm not going to go into the app builder today, but it's really designed to consolidate a lot of what we have all into one interface, give you access to all those same ADOs we were looking at from the collections. If we wanted to drag drop those in, we can bring in more. And it essentially becomes a more robust system that allows for a lot more capability, all with that in one interface. But that routing we were just looking at, the tokens address here, I'm just going to reroute it here so that it's a little more clean. I'm essentially saying that this 721, which is named tokens, and I'm piping it over and I'm saying, hey, here for the token address, I want to give it that. So same thing, if I were to, I think it's Shift D, yeah. So I don't have the minter associated. If I wanted to, I can drag drop that minter. The top and the bottom are the references to the panel that I'm using. The left and the right are the input sources. So I can auto link that. And that's essentially what we were doing there, is we're saying, hey, we want to reference the crowd fund. It's called crowd fund. So I want to give it the assignment of that. I'm actually going to just jump back into the ADO builder so that we can see this in a little easier, more easier to read language. I'm just going to call this Hackathon Crowdfund. So this is the name of the app, and we'll see what that looks like here. I'll show us what we do with the wallet connection here as well. So we are multi-chain compatible. And so I'm going to assign the terms and conditions, and you should always read those. You can see here in our testnet build, we've got 4 general working sets right now, and that includes Archway. So I'm going to do this deployment here on Archway. This is on Constantine. So it'll be operating using a const, and you'll need to have some const from the faucet in order to make any transactions connected to your Kepler wallet. But so this is that base build that we took from the template. I've already given it an assignment. I said, I'm going to give permission to my crowdfund app component to mint NFTs for me. And we need to give it some basic information. I'm going to call it crowdfund NFTs, and then I'll just give it a short name of, say, CNFTs, and that'll give us a setup for the token collection. The crowdfund has just some very basic configuration options, and one of those restrictions is, do we want to allow minting after sale? We were talking about the NFTs may be destroyed if you don't meet that sales goal. Well, if you don't allow for minting after sale, then that is a completed process. And once those are destroyed, you will no longer be able to mint new tokens. If you allow for minting after sale, then if you failed, you may be able to make the adjustments and mint some new NFTs, try to make a fix for what it is that kept you from making your initial fund, and reissue under the same crowd fund. So it's all about how you want to configure it. Many of these things are designed so there's multiple uses of the same elements of any of those components that you want to build from and what they look like. In addition to downloading information specific for those panels, we can actually save the full template. I can download a full template of this build that I could keep for myself as a file, send to you. We also have that available as a URL, so I can actually copy this and paste it in my chat, and other people can come in. It's been great for collaborative works. It's great for debugging with us. We often request that you send those over for us. We also have an automatic export to CLI. So if you are preferring not to be publishing your transactions through an internet browser and want something a little more secure, you can utilize the CLI, and this will auto-generate the commands for you to just paste right into the CLI and make this same transaction occur. So if I'm lucky and I have this set up right, I should be able to make this build. It'll pre-simulate for us so we know automatically if there's a problem or not. We try to get you the best information for any of the technical errors, but there are some difficulties in the current infrastructure for things of getting that information. This broadcast, I feel confident will go through because we already tried to simulate it. And so essentially what we just did in that small amount of time of me rambling through it is we created a series of smart contracts that live within that app application and are referencing each other using that virtualized file system directory path. Now I could pull this up and get the Explorer data, but I can also get this transaction data later. When I close this out, it'll bring us to our assets system. And essentially what the asset system does is it's got a listing of all of the different things that you've deployed using our system on chain. And that applies for each one of the chains. We're going to have a small delay right now. We need to meet consensus when we make posts. So sometimes we have to wait for that to meet consensus, and then we'll index that and it'll be available. We have the refresh window. So if you have a small delay, then you can go ahead and bring that in. You see after the refresh, we have the Hackathon Crowdfund app has now been deployed and developed here. Here we can see those elements that we put together, the crowdfund and the tokens. And each one of these elements, as I go over them, you see there's kind of this pop-up menu. And I can look at information specific to those particular components and get all the information about them. The transactions we were just referencing are all going to be listed there. We have some extended functionality that's coming out here shortly for that as well. But you can always get more information there, so you don't need to track those transactions. You can get them later. Additionally, there are queries and interactions that are available through these additional menus. Now, each one of these is specific to the type of the ADO component that you're looking at. So this ADO is going to have functionality specific for a crowd fund, where the one beneath it is going to have functionality specific to a tokens contract, say, such as minting. And the app itself will have elements such as the app, and we can add in new components later. There's a lot of functional elements to go into that. I won't be touching base on that today. But the base implementation of this now facilitates for us to actually operate. So now we've deployed the smart contracts on chain. We were able to link them up without having to load them up sequentially. And I can quickly confirm who is allowed to make minting processes here for our new 721 tokens. So if I were to come in, I can run a quick query, just pick that out of that menu system here. And we see here in the messages that are available, I'm running the minter query against that particular ADO that we had, and it should tell me that general address being the CN7. And here we see CN7. So we've given the permission to mint to the crowd fund, which means that traditionally I might go mint using my wallet, but in this example, I've given permission to the ADO. So you can have the custody rights being given over to the other elements in your apps. And here, the crowd fund actually has a mint functionality. I can go ahead and pull that up. The mint functionality in the crowd fund is the same as the batch mint function that you can find here for the 721. Here we go, batch mint. So the functionality is the same, and we have it listed here. I've got a payload for this because I want to show you what it is to actually load up quite a few. So I've got a crowdfund exchange. I've already got these 721 tokens, I think. Here we go, crowdfund mint. And this should hopefully load up all of the information. So here I've actually got set up with quite a few NFTs. I did 100, that's the limit that we have per transaction. You can use our multi-execute to issue more of these. If you need to do a couple thousand, then you'll just run through this process that way as well. We have some additional features coming up in the next few months for helping you generate these in a lot more easy and quick way. But here you can see I've just loaded all the information. Minting an NFT is as simple as giving it the information for the token ID, who that owner address is. In our mint process for the crowdfund, I don't need to provide it because the crowdfund will already own it. We also have our token URI data. This is the metadata I've hosted on IPFS for that. And then just some additional information about the presentation team. So I can do a quick scroll so that we don't have to go all the way through it, but that's 100 NFTs that I'm going to be now trying to publish into that NFT contract using the crowdfund. And we'll find out here if the simulation will allow that to work. And if it does, it'll give me my general price set. And here it looks like we should be able to do that. My transaction cost for minting 100 NFTs is about 6 const, which I don't have enough on my balance sheet for. So I need to decline that process, but I can quickly, hopefully on the fly, let me just start pulling these. If I do this right, I should be able to pull quite a few of these. Worst case, I will mint one independently. I'm just going to run through this till I run out of NFTs. And now I should be at 123. Got quite a few less. So maybe we'll see how many fewer I can get and then try to get the price down. Essentially, this is just operator error in the sense that I didn't have enough funds on this particular account while I tried to go through this. So let's see how many we got here. We have quite a few. So I think what I'm going to do instead is this. I'm going to start this over. I'm going to copy in my token URI, and we're going to just go do this real quick with one NFT. So I'm going to come in crowdfund. I'm going to do the mint process. And instead of using my load data, I'm just going to add in a new item. We're going to use the token NFT. I'm going to call it CNFT-1. And then I won't assign a token address. I'm going to use the IPFS data that we had stored. And I'm just going to call this Andromeda presentation team. So now we'll be publishing just one NFT, which is kind of small for a crowd fund, but at least we know we can afford to do that. So now when I estimate that, if I did that correctly, that'll give me the broadcast. I see that in the ACONs, then I should be able to afford it. I still can't afford that. Why is that giving me a price set? I need to try this one more time. Okay, well, I don't know if you can see, but I don't have sufficient funds. So what I'm going to do instead is go on to an example showing it in use. So I have another build. We were discussing the idea that it can be on multiple chains. So I have some other examples here in say Terra as well. So any of the chains that you do, these deployments that you use, you can reuse those. You can bring them over, and as we move forward with some of our other builds, we'll be coming in with those for some cross-chain interactions as well. So we have that same build out here already set up, and there's one that's already running and working here in that example. But essentially what I've done, I've minted that process, and when I mint those NFTs, I then have the ability to come into the marketplace. I'm going to go back to the Archway so we see the example, but it won't work because I didn't have sufficient funds. But essentially now I can come into this process and I can now run the process of that crowd fund to actually start a sale. And there's a configuration option here with simply setting what is the end time. You get a simple, easy date collection option. I could set that for tomorrow, how many tokens we want per wallet, and we can configure these things in order to set up what the configurations are, who gets the funds, what do we want to do with those. And there's more information in the guides that walk you through this process. Once that is done and we start the sale, then essentially we wind up with the situation where now we have a working, functioning build, and how is it that we connect that over to our systems for, say, that example build that we have with the crowd fund. And that starts out with our embeddable set. And essentially all you have to do to get a good working example or see that your build is working is we have these embeddables. And you can come in and you customize this. We're going to be in ACONs because we're on Archway. And we would give it a base name of, say, crowd fund example. And I'm not going to do any publication on this, but in the collection option, just like we added those components earlier, we can come in and add collections, and we have our 4 use case examples. I've got a crowd fund embeddable here, and when I add in this field, it asks me what's the address of that crowd fund that we were working on. Let me just grab it from here. So
Leif, can I interrupt for just 2 seconds?
Please go ahead.
Would you mind sending me over your testnet address, and I will try to get you some more testnet funds?
Yes, that'd be great. And I'm going to do that now.
Sorry for the interruption, guys.
No, not at all. I appreciate it. And there it is, Connor. So that process, I just need to get what is that crowd fund address. And then I can come in here, I can say that's my crowd fund address. I can use the VFS references here if I wanted to, but I'm just going to copy these out for the use of it. And essentially by adding these in, making this small configuration, it builds a custom config file for us that allows us to come in and get more information. You give it a name. You also see that if we don't fill in information, it'll prompt you for required fields. And I can get information. I can actually download this config file, which allows me to have that for customization later, which we're going to jump into in just a moment. But making a preview on this and the publication behind it gives us a build for a crowd fund. Here we have the information, and we can actually look at the metadata, things of that nature that are loading this information and see more about the properties. This is all pulled from the IPFS. So there's a base build of an embeddable. And so that process I just worked through gives us the build so that we can actually mint these things out. and I can actually run through that here in just a moment after I get some test funds from Connor, just so we can know that that works. And so this is a working example. Now, this crowdfund example I will talk about here in just a little bit with the embeddables, but I need to move forward to keep on track with time. And leave a little bit in Q&A, and maybe during the Q&A process, I will go ahead and mint out those tokens, start that sale, and set up the embeddable while we have any discussions. So, but that gives you an understanding at least of like what the process might look like for making some deployments, interacting with them, getting them configured, minting some NFTs, going through the process of a sale. And once again, those are all laid out in the guides for you to be familiar with. And what those elements are, how to interact with them, and the ADO components and kind of their usage. I'm going to jump over real quick over to Terra again, just because I have more laid out in this particular example. So we have those 4 use cases, but here on Terra's build, I've done quite a few more examples using some of the additional elements out of those ADO collections. So our primaries that we had was the auction, the marketplace, the crowdfund, and the exchange. But I've also added in some things for time lock and some staking. We've got some rate limiting withdrawals. So there's other functional elements that we can be putting in here, and they have different build types and different build configurations and options that work with these systems. So essentially, there's kind of this management interface for any of those deployed units that you have. We have an ability to filter through those as well. So if we really wanted to, we can come in and try to narrow those down to just the auctions. We can search specific for names if we wanted to. So maybe here I can see, I think they're all called example, but let's go ahead and just say staking. And I should be able to filter that down to just my staking example. So we try to at least get you some fundamentals. We'll improve those sort filtering processes, but that means that you've got some easy to find and manage asset systems and are able to deploy these things. So what I wanted to talk about a little bit is the tracks now, and that at least hopefully gave us an introduction to the system, how we do deployment, and what to anticipate of how the system works. And our first track revolves specifically around how can you be, if you are a smart contract experienced developer, how can you be contributing to the AELL so that you can be auto-loading all these, your smart contracts to be available to all the users and loaded up in this way that we just looked at here. And that's really what the initial track 1 that we have here entails, specifically looking at what our development process is for contributing into this ALL, the collection of the ADOs, and what that looks like. We have a couple of different things that we have it open for, but we specifically, in our build example, are really hoping to look for the contribution process to revolve specifically around Archway and some Archway-based solutions. An example that we've given here, I believe specifically, has been, the name is escaping me, Astrovault, I believe, as one of the examples. But essentially what we would really like to do is have the smart contracts that we've developed now are kind of generic in the sense that they can be used everywhere. And we'd really like to be doing something that's Archway specific. And so we have a degree or a subtype categorization of those ADOs that we call sockets. And that's essentially allowing for you to create the ADOs that connect to pre-existing projects. And we'd love to be looking at the integration of those Archway-based solutions. And we have some general suggestions for you there, but we also, like we're kind of referencing anything in the Archway ecosystem. So if you're involved in a project, if there's a project you love, if there's something that you really think that Archway has that's going on right, that you think would be great to have accessible to anybody who's coming into Andromeda and would want to be able to utilize those solutions in any of these options, then that's specifically what we're hoping to get you to try and make a smart contract development and submission to be considered for inclusion in the ALL. Anybody who makes it through the conclusion or the selection process, besides our prize winnings, we also are partnered up to get an audit on that as well. So the winners on that would also receive an audit to be added into the ALL as well. So I think there's a lot of really great projects out here in the space, and we're going to leave that up to you. It does not have to be something specifically from that. We have some recommendations for you there, and we're happy to provide a little more guidance if it's unclear. But that's going to be the key core functionality that we're really looking for is, can we come into creating some NFT or some ADOs to be added to the ALL that specifically reference and use the Archway specific projects and solutions that are available out there. As we look at what that is, the github.com Andromeda protocol is our core GitHub. And in here, you will find we have core. This is actually where we have the majority of all of our smart contracts. We talk about how they're segregated and give you some examples so you can actually see some of the code base examples from the ADOs that we currently have in place. And we'll use those as some code references and kind of see what those particular builds have been like. In the documentation, in the developing an ADO section, there's an area for getting started. And it walks you through what is it to get started developing an ADO. We kind of walk through what that general process is, getting you an understanding of what to anticipate there. We break that down into the various required areas for instantiations, executions, querying, and testing. Additionally, we have ADO examples for you. So this is just a base build for what that is. We go through the submission process to try and give you more information of where's the repo, what does that look like, what kind of information are we looking to support, how do you make the submission, making the general requirements for, say, meeting all your unit testing, things of that nature. And we provide some examples as well. This is the database specifically designed for those submissions. And we walk through that process in some ADO examples as well, kind of taking a specific CW3 fixed multi-sig contract off of CW Plus that we use just to outline something that you would be familiar with and reference how it's changed, adding in the cargoes and related elements that need to be adjusted in order to work with the ADO system. It's a pretty low overhead in conversion and setup, but you need to get some familiarity with it, and it will have to be set up in a way that meets all the requirements. We outline what those are for you. We talk about them a little more clearly, and we do have the submission example, so you can know specifically what that works like as the process for the submission. We've also taken that and made it with the working example of that CW3 so that you can see it in context. And so the process of making the smart contracts, making that contribution is all going to be accessible through those. They should be listed and available here in our track in the support links that we have at the bottom. Just how to build the ADO write-up listed out here. So we have those references, and we'll make sure to add any more if there's any other clarification issues on that. But that's kind of the primary track for the ADO contribution. The other side of this being on the embeddables. And so those custom embeddables that we were looking at, what is the track 2? So we looked at 4 examples today, but those are open source. But we have a base starting template that allows you to custom build those web applications. So for those of you that aren't smart contract developers and are more familiar with web application development, we're looking to have a track specifically for you to go in and do some custom builds. We have a base starter template that's already pre-configured, and I'll kind of talk through that here in just a moment. But utilizing that, we're looking at having you create some custom web applications, make the deployments using the systems that we just looked at in the web app earlier, or the CLI if you prefer, but use our systems to make the deployments. And then use a custom build or use the blank starter system to create a custom build. You have code references that'll give you, and a couple other things here as well, but we have 2 tracks. We can do a custom build. You really should orient it towards a real world solution, something that would have a value to an individual, a group, a company. It should have some contextualization. The more that you illustrate that in a real world use and a practical, understandable way, the better the judging is going to go in your favor on that. That's a little more open-ended. If you're looking for some rough guidance, I'd say take some of the ADOs that are not in the use cases as consideration. So maybe a time lock or a rate limited withdrawals, and consider what kind of interfacing or solutions you might be able to build around those. For those that need a little more guidance, we've kind of lined out to say an asset or inventory management system. We've kind of called initially saying in-game assets. You could think of it as an inventory screen or a vault that might give information about, say, materials and currencies, as well as different things that you might get, if that be armor or weapons. So those can easily be done with CW20s, some CW721s, and create a custom interface that showcases that. You need to showcase a little bit of functionality for how that would work. It does not have to be game specific. If your inventory control is more about, say, clothing management or something of that nature, that's an acceptable transition. It does not have to be specific to game, but it does need to be inventory control management. And so those are kind of some general, those would be the general lines for that. In the same repo at GitHub, we find a repo for the Andromeda JS. That's our custom SDK that's managed for communicating with those deployed smart contract solutions to the front end implementation. And we have another repo, which is the Andromeda Next.js application starter. And this is a blank setup that you can start from. It's already pre-configured. It's in Next.js, so you'll need React, but we've already got it pre-configured for GraphQL references, for data pulling. It's got the Andromeda JS that we just discussed for the SDK communications with the smart contract solutions. It's got state management, and the Kepler support is already put in place. So that would be the place for you to start from in order to kind of come in and do those custom builds. Additionally, you can see the examples that we have from the embeddable marketplace demo repo that covers those 4 working examples that we looked at earlier for the web builds, for the auction, the crowdfund, the token exchange, and the marketplace. So if you need some references to see how functional elements for the button press calls, or where we're doing data pulling, how to retrieve information from IPFS, anything along those lines, you can get those. Additionally, as a side note, since this is public, you also could be doing a build like we looked at today, host that yourself, and use that config file that I was referencing before to customize that setup and independently host that without any need for code development. But that'll be the action call for track 2 as well. And I feel like I went a little bit long on some of that as we're closing in on the hour here. So I might want to go ahead and come back in and take a quick look to see where we might be with any questions and answers. And I maybe have some tokens in from Connor, and I can kind of do the rest of that build while we maybe take any questions. I do not see the private chat either, so I may not have access to chat menu. So I may not be able to do Q&A if we don't have someone here with access to the chat.
Yeah. I was just looking at the live stream chats that we have. Seems like we do not have any questions for now, but we've definitely dropped the hacker Discord link, the invite to the Discord. So I think that would be a place where the hackers would go and revisit this conversation if needed. But yeah, all good for now.
All right, excellent. Well, if that's the case, I don't have too much more to address. I'll give Connor an option if there was anything he wanted to mention or address as well, and we'll be available for additional support in the additional community calls and any of the resources I mentioned as well.
I don't really have much to add. I think you did a very good overview of everything that we offer currently. We have a lot more features coming out over the next couple of months, but Leif did a great job of demonstrating what's currently there.
Great. And next time I'll make sure I have enough tokens.
Easily done.
Yeah, but for everyone watching, thank you so much for tuning in. Leif, I'd love to thank you. Definitely, that was a very, very immersive and very detailed presentation. Yeah, for the developers, feel free to revisit this anytime that you want. It would be up on the workshop tabs on the hackathon page. So anytime you're stuck with anything, the workshop tab and the hacker channel on Discord should be your place to go. Yeah, thanks a lot, Leif and Connor, for hosting this hackathon, for hosting this workshop today. Really excited to having kicking off the workshop series and just seeing how the Hunt-A-Thon hackathon goes. For everyone building in this hackathon, very good luck. Keep building and breaking.
Thank you. Good luck.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Bye bye. Take care.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, I think Lynn, we're done with this workshop. Thank you for supporting at the back end. And yeah, thank you for tuning in again.